Hello, my name is Heath Jones. I'm the pastor of Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. And if you don't know about our church or about our ministries, you might want to check out our website at www.indyncc.org. That's www.indncc.org. But for now and for today, we're going to consider a passage that is found in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of John, and we will be going over verses 31 through 35. And it reads, "When he had gone out, Jesus said, 'Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.'" So, how will they know that you are a Christian? And yeah, you know by now the punchline. I just read it for you. But really, how will they know? When I think back on the messaging that I received growing up about this question, how should a Christian behave, I can remember the highlights. Don't cuss, don't smoke, say no to drugs, don't watch bad movies. But there was so much more to remember, so many rules. And so some of us, as we got older, thought we would just boil it down to a WWJD bracelet. What would Jesus do? You may remember those. Or maybe some of us wore a cross. I know that I did to school. And if my goal was to let people know that I was a Christian, I thought maybe if I just branded myself better, it would save some of the trouble. And I remember once when I was in the 10th grade, I was goofing off during English class, and the teacher called my attention to the cross around my neck and asked, "Are you a Christian?" I wasn't expecting the question. I bumbled out a yes, to which she replied, "Well, you sure aren't acting like one." So, I suppose people will know that I am Jesus' disciple if I can only pay attention and sit still in English class. But in the final analysis, do these displays of piety matter? Are they convincing? Do they present a witness and call others to a better way? I mean, such superficial displays of piety may be harmless so far as that goes, but has anyone ever been impressed enough by these things to turn with us and then follow Jesus? But if they will not know we are Christians by our t-shirts, bracelets, or our clean language, or our abstaining from bad habits, how will they know? And I'm beating around the bush. I just threw you the softest of softball questions. You already know the answer. As I said, we just read it. Love one another. And our love for another, that's how they'll know. And Jesus gave this answer up front. It's like we have the cheat sheet for the test already. But he gives them this answer just after modeling the love he is calling them to. That part we did not read today. But just before, he showed them what it may look like to love somebody by way of actions. They have gathered here for a meal, and the text is very clear on this point. Jesus knows that his friend Judas is fixing to betray him. But still, before the meal, he commences to washing the feet of his friends, including Judas, including Peter, who would deny him 3 times, all of the disciples who would abandon them. Britannica.com says of this foot washing custom, quote, "The practice of foot washing was originally an act of hospitality in Palestinian homes, performed for guests who wore sandals and walked on dusty roads by a servant or the wife of the host." So it's this role, these roles that Jesus is filling, and in so doing, he's placing himself in the same social strata as slaves and women. And slaves, were owned by the head of the house, and then women who often held as few rights as slaves in that day. So Jesus, the one who embodied the presence and will of God, shows us what it looks like when a human loves with the love of God. He even handed Judas a piece of bread personally in this meal, which was another act of affection and respect in his culture, to feed someone, even the one who we know is his enemy. And Jesus then cleans the feet of his friends, and even the feet of the one who would betray him, even the feet of Peter, who would deny him 3 times in the next 24 hours. Jesus washes the feet of them all, without prejudice. An aside about bath time in my house, the Jones house. It works this way. When the evening arrives, the bath evening, it's usually almost marked on the calendar, we dread it because the kids are a terror during this time, and we usually put it off for as long as we can, but then we bathe our kids without prejudice. What I mean is, they get a bath whether they like it or not. And of course, we always love our kids, but there are days when they try our patience. Still, a bath is a bath, and we bathe them at the end of the day because we love them. So let's just imagine that what prompted the cleaning was because they rolled around in the mud after they'd been told explicitly not to do that. Let's just say they made a mess of themselves. Yet, we clean them up because we love them. The bath water washing over them and the soap I use to scrub beneath their chins can be seen to be the grace of a parent, grace that will meet them in their messiness and try to make the most of them. Their baths can be as baptisms that wash away the dirt and the grime that they have gathered upon themselves, and an expression of their parents' love. Jesus bathed the feet of his disciples, and those feet were attached to flawed people who were just about to let Jesus down in his most desperate hour, yet he showed his love for them by way of a foot bath. And as I've been saying, even Judas got his toes scrubbed. And then they all sat down for a meal. No bed without supper for misbehaving disciples. Not that I do that to my kids, but they sit down for a meal. And instead of rebuking them for what Jesus knows about their mental states and what they're about to do, Jesus blesses the meal, breaks bread. They all drink from the same cup. Here is another snapshot image of God's love and grace. Flawed family members and friends invited to the table despite themselves. So again, love is modeled for us. And Jesus seems to be gearing up for a major point, the point that leaps from the page in today's text. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Of this passage, Episcopal Minister Debbie Thomas writes the following. Quote, "May I take a moment here to point out what Jesus doesn't say. When death comes knocking and the Son of God has mere hours left to communicate the heart of his message to his disciples, he doesn't say, believe the right things. He doesn't say, maintain personal and doctrinal purity. He doesn't say, worship like this or attend a church like that. He doesn't even say, read your Bible or pray every day or preach the gospel to every living creature. He says, love one another. That's it. The last dream of a dead man walking. All of Christianity distilled down to its essence so that maybe we'll pause long enough to hear it. Love one another. End quote. And what I can say is simple enough until you try it. I mean, how can you manufacture love? You can't simply choose to do it. And in my experience, love just doesn't work that way. But this is Jesus' dying wish, that we love one another. So how does this play out in practical ways? Well, in regards my children. How do they demonstrate love to each other? After we have modeled our love for them by giving them baths, by feeding them, and doing various things that they sometimes just fail to notice or acknowledge as tokens of love, how do they treat each other? And some days they do tolerably well. But on other days, the best that I can hope for is that maybe they'll act as if they love one another. Our conversations may go something like this. I say, share your toys, to which one of them responds, but why? I say, just do it. But why? They respond. And I say, because you're siblings, you're supposed to get along. And a bit later, I may find myself saying something like, hey, use kind words when you talk to one another. And this I proclaim in loud, unkind tones. And I might go on, I don't care if they're annoying you, just be nice. Can't you just pretend that you love each other, if only for a minute? And I know that my kids really do love each other. Honestly, I know they do, but you wouldn't always know it by their behavior. So how are we supposed to model this love in authentic ways, especially if there are people that we don't especially like? It's hard enough for our close family members, much less people on the outside who we don't especially like, because, even at church, we don't necessarily always like everyone, And yet Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. Well, how has Jesus loved us? That question, I think, will help a bit. And he loved by meeting people, all people, in the places where they most needed love. In short, you show up to those places and times in a person's life when they are in the most need of grace and loving support. And this doesn't mean you always feel fondly toward them or that you even like them. But still, you meet them in their moments of need. Even your enemies in their moments of need, and that's love. To quote Debbie Thomas again, weep with those who weep, laugh with those who laugh, touch the untouchables, feed the hungry, welcome the child, release the captive, forgive the sinner, confront the oppressor, comfort the oppressed, wash each other's feet, hold each other close, tell each other the truth, guide each other home. End quote. And this is what Jesus did again and again. He healed and he brought salvation to all who had need. He met them in their moments of need. Romans, slaves, rich people, poor people, men and women, tax collectors and sinners, all persons. And in so doing, he modeled God's love and grace, which is lavished on us all regardless. Jesus even loved his enemies in this way. He loved those who scarce seemed to deserve it. He washed Judas's feet. He said to God from the cross while they killed him, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience of coming across someone you didn't especially get along with while they were, say, crying or in some moment of duress. This happened to me just after a friend died, and someone who I usually didn't get along with held me, hugged me, and spoke words of comfort when I most needed them. These are expressions of real love, and this is the way God has loved. My family has recently had a death in the family, and we've seen this sort of love transform the situation in important ways. Family members who have often struggled to get along have gathered alongside one another in love, setting aside the axes they've long held to grind. And they've modeled the love of God, and they are being saved by it. It is in their moment of sorrow and crisis, in our family's moment of sorrow and crisis, saving us this love. And Christians are not only supposed to model this love, we are meant to widen the circle of inclusion so that our love is shared with those we previously thought of as outside of our boundaries. This is one of the key takeaways from Judas's inclusion in the meal, the fact that Jesus himself handed him a morsel to eat and washed his feet. It's to say, here is a place where we discover that we are a part of a much larger family the family of God. And this will often include people who we are surprised to find there. So when someone in our community finds themselves in need of grace and love, we show up. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter if they tithe the most or give nothing at all. It doesn't even matter if they grate on your nerves on any other given day. When they need our love to live, they have it. When they suffer loss, we are there for them. When they end up in the hospital, we visit them. When they upset us, we try to reconcile. And even if reconciliation seems impossible, even when the best we can do is avoid them at church, when we find that they are broken, hungry, heartbroken, alone, isolated, in need, we are there for them. As with me during my kids' bath time, we do it not because we like them in their worst moments, or because giving them the bath is especially easy, or because they are particularly deserving of our attention or care, but because we love them regardless. And pastors baptize even the most flawed Christians into this life that we found together as followers of Jesus. And every week, we choose to gather around the communion table, modeling that meal where Jesus gathered with his friends and broke bread with those who were soon to abandon him. And our communion is like that, a family gathering after a long, hard day. Perhaps the family members have not been as kind to one another as they ought to have been, but still, we break bread together and sit down for a meal. Because maybe after a heart-to-heart talk around the table, we Christians will begin to model God's love for the world. So we gather around our communion tables on Sundays alongside persons who are easy to love and alongside others who are more challenging. But we are committed to serving one another, to pass the communion plate along to those with whom we do not always get along. We'll even lift the cup up to their lips if that's what it takes, if they are unable to do so themselves, in the name of love. And we will find our culture's equivalent to foot washing, acts of service and love that we do for anyone in our community, regardless of their alleged or disputed worthiness. We will meet one another in our time of need, and in so doing, our love should be obvious. And when we meet them in their time of need, our love for them is obvious. And then they'll know. And they'll know that we are Christians and perhaps join the movement. In church, we have to get this right. And why do I really need to state the obvious? Well, for one, it was Jesus' dying wish in the text that we just read, but also many have been put off by the ways we Christians have failed to love one another as well. Not just those outside, but each other. Not just those who maybe don't go to church, but those who are in our churches. So it's no wonder as to why the message of love has failed to break through. The church has at times modeled love's opposite. As to our failures, G.K. Chesterton's words hit the nail on the head, and I'm quoting, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." So perhaps the reason people are unimpressed by Christians and Christianity broadly speaking is because the church has been deficient in love. I think that this must be true. So imagine with me what happened to us, to our local church, to the church at large, or even to our communities broadly speaking, if we took Jesus' command seriously and modeled a greater love for the world. And we know what would happen. Jesus said it. They will know that we are Christians. And the hope is that they will join with us. But not to serve us or our agendas, or to make us feel better on a Sunday morning in the sanctuary. No, we hope that others will draw near to us, inspired by the love they see in us, so that they will be transformed by this love, and so that our world might be saved. What would happen if Christians modeled the love of Jesus? I think we know what would happen. Our community, our city, our country, our world, through him, by this love, would be saved. Only love will save us. And the good news is, God loves the world. And God is finding ways of loving it back to life. And that includes us, loving through us. And we cannot help that there are so many who hurt and hate instead of love. But we have this moment, and we have our example, Jesus. And we have God's Spirit. And as I was saying, we cannot help what we cannot help. Or, as Taylor Swift saying, haters gonna hate. But I think that for now, it may start with me and with you. If you are overwhelmed by the lack of love in the world, let's just start with me and with you. We can at least start there. We can try and love each other as best as we are able right here and right now. So let's build this community on this last request of a dying man. Let's love each other with the love of God and love this hurting world back to life.